What if I told you that the life that's making you miserable is also the one that you're addicted to? Not the phone, not the scroll, not the bad habit, not the toxic relationship, but the whole life. The anxiety that you can't shake, the relationship that drains you, the job that slowly hollows you out, the pattern that you keep returning to. Even when you swore this time would be different. What if none of that is happening because you're weak, but because each one of those things is giving you something you need, something you haven't found a way to get yet? That's not an excuse, that's not permission to stay stuck. That is the most useful thing anyone has ever said to me about why change is so hard. And today, that's what we're gonna be talking about. Why you're addicted to a life that's making you miserable. Video 3 of our series, Becoming Yourself on Purpose. Let's start with addiction. And addiction is not what we think it is. We have a very specific image when we hear the word addiction. Something extreme, something clinical, something that happens to other people in circumstances that are very different from ours. But Dr. Anna Lembke, psychiatrist at Stanford and one of the world's leading experts on addiction, completely dismantles the idea of addiction. In her book, Dopamine Nation, she says addiction is not about the substance or the behavior itself. It's about the brain's relationship with dopamine and the way it constantly tries to restore one thing, balance. And to explain that, she uses an image. And I want you guys to actually see. Imagine a scale right in the middle, perfectly balanced. That's your brain at neutral. No pleasure, no pain, just equilibrium. Now, every time you do something that feels good, scroll through social media, get a notification, eat something sweet, receive a compliment, avoid something you're scared of, the scale tips toward pleasure. And that feels like relief, like comfort, like for a moment, everything is okay. But here is what Anna Lembke discovered that changes everything about how we understand ourselves. The brain doesn't want you to feel good. The brain wants that scale level. So the moment pleasure tips the scale, the brain's automatic response is to tip it back. And it almost always overshoots, which means the pleasure fades faster than it arrived. And now you're sitting on the pain side of the scale. A little more restless than before, a little more empty, a little more like you need whatever caused the pleasure, just to get back to where you started. So you scroll again, so you check again, so you go back again. And each time the scale swings. And the pain side gets heavier and heavier until eventually the same amount of pleasure that used to balance the scale barely moves it at all. And the pain on the other side starts to feel like your default. That's the loop, not a moral failing, not a lack of discipline, but a scale that's tipping back and forth faster and faster, further and further from center. Lemke writes, we're all running from pain, and we're all looking for the drug that will make us feel okay. The problem is not that we seek relief. The problem is that the relief keeps requiring more. Now replace the word drug with phone, with validation, with staying in a situation that feels familiar, even though it hurts. The mechanism is identical, and the scale is the same. And understanding that scale is the first step to stopping the swing. The real reason we stay. John Harry spent 3 years traveling the world, interviewing scientists, psychologists, and people in recovery for his book, Lost Connection. And what he found actually reframed how I think about addiction. He says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. People don't stay addicted to things primarily because of chemical dependency. They stay addicted because addiction is filling a hole that nothing else is filling. Connection, meaning, identity, belonging. He writes, addiction is an adaptation. It's not you, it's your cage. And when you understand the cage, you can start to find the door. Now think about the things in your life that you keep returning to. even though they make you feel worse. The doom scrolling at midnight, not because you enjoy it, but because the alternative is laying in silence with your own thoughts, and that feels more dangerous. The toxic relationship that you keep going back to, not because you don't know it's wrong, but because it's the only place where someone sees you, even imperfectly, even painfully. The job that's slowly killing your spirit, not because you can't leave, but because staying feels like control and leaving feels like falling. And each one of those things is giving you something: numbing, distraction, the illusion of connection, the illusion of control, the avoidance of something that feels more terrifying than the pain that you already know. That's not weakness. That's a very human response to needs that aren't being met any other way. What the scroll is actually doing to you. Let's talk specifically about the phone, because I think this is where most of us live the loop more visibly. Nicholas Carr wrote a book called The Shallow about what the internet is literally doing to the structure of our brains. Without permission, without awareness. He writes, "The net is designed to be an interruption system, a machine geared to the fragmentation of attention. Every time you pick up your phone, not to do something specific, but just because the silence felt uncomfortable, you're training your brain to need interruption, to be uncomfortable with silence, to reach for stimulation the moment things get quiet." Dr. Judson Brewer, neuroscientist who has spent decades studying habit loops, found something even more specific. He calls it trigger behavior reward. The trigger is the discomfort, boredom, anxiety, loneliness, uncertainty. The behavior is the reach, the scroll, the check, the click. The reward is temporary relief, the dopamine hit that makes the discomfort disappear for 30 seconds. And every time that loop completes, it gets stronger, more automatic, more invisible, more like just what you do. Until one day you realize you haven't sat with your own thoughts in months, and you have no idea what you actually think about your own life, because you haven't given yourself the silence you need to find out. Staying in the situation that's hurting you. Now I want to move away from the phone and talk about something deeper, because the addiction to a miserable life is not just about scrolling, it's about staying. Staying in the relationship that stopped being good 2 years ago. Staying in the city that you never felt like home. Staying in the version of yourself that you built for someone else. And maybe you should talk to someone else, the author said. People come to therapy saying they want to change, but what they really want is to feel better about not changing. They want to feel better about not changing, because change, even change towards something better, requires you to leave something behind. And what you're leaving behind is not just the bad situation. It's the identity you built around it. The story of who you are that makes sense only in the context of where you are. If you leave the relationship, how are you without it? If you change the job, what does that mean about the years you stayed? If you stop seeking validation online, how do you know you're enough? Staying is not just comfortable, it's identity preserving. And that is a much harder thing to walk away from than just a bad habit. The craving underneath the craving. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, he talks about something he calls the difference between the craving and the deeper need. He says every behavior has two layers: the surface craving, the thing you think you want, and the deeper need, the thing you're actually trying to get. You crave the scroll, but what you need is rest. You crave the validation, but what you need is to feel like you matter. You crave the distraction, but what you need is to feel safe enough to be present in your own life. He writes, "You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." And I want to add something to that. You don't rise above your addictions by white-knuckling your way through them. You rise above them by understanding what need they were meeting and finding a truer way to meet it. Because here is what nobody talks about. Willpower is not the answer. Willpower is finite. Willpower runs out. Willpower is fighting the symptom while the root cause keeps growing underground? The answer is curiosity. Getting genuinely curious about what the behavior is protecting you from, what it's giving you, what hole it's filling. Once you understand what you're actually hungry for, you can start feeding yourself something real. How you start to break the loop. Going back to Dr. Judson Brewer's research, he found that the most effective way to break a habit loop is not restriction, it's curiosity. He calls it RAIN. Recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. Recognize the urge when it arrives. Allow it to be there without immediately acting on it. Investigate it. What does it actually feel like? Where do you feel it in your body? What is it really asking for? Nurture yourself with what you actually need. This sounds simple, but it's not. But here is what it does that willpower can't. It makes the loop conscious, and conscious loops lose power because addiction, behavioral addiction, thrives in automaticity. In the space between trigger and behavior, where you're not even aware a choice is being made, the moment you slow the space down even by 2 seconds, it creates room for another choice. Not always, not imperfectly, but sometimes. And sometimes it is how it starts. Don Harry puts it this way: you aren't doomed to be ruled by the deepest, most pain-avoiding parts of yourself. But you do have to be willing to sit with the pain long enough to understand what it's telling you. That's the work, not the app blocker, not the 30-day detox, not the willpower sprint, but the work of getting genuinely curious about your own discomfort and trusting yourself enough to stay with it. You're not addicted to misery because you enjoy suffering. You're addicted to the things that make you miserable because nothing else in your life is meeting right now. If you liked my content, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next one.